Right guys, I have to admit, Mark Robins being sacked by Coventry was not on my bingo card for 2024. We've got so much to unpack in today's video. Obviously, it happened a few days ago where Coventry made the brutal decision to part company with Mark Robins. As of recording, it's Frank Lampard who's the favourite to land that job. We're going to be taking a closer look at Coventry in today's video, where things have gone wrong for Robins and why Lampard may or may not be the right man to replace him. Coventry fans, I'd love to get your perspective on all of this in the comments down below. You've had a little bit of time to think on it now. And general fans of the Championship as well, what have you made of this decision and the next few days of aftermath that have followed? So coming into this November international break, this is how the Championship table is currently shaping up. We've got Coventry sat 17th in the table here, obviously. Prior to Robins being sacked, Coventry had played 14 matches. They had that game over the weekend against Sunderland, which finished 2-2, but this is generally speaking the state of play when Robins lost his job as well. Coventry sat 17th in the league, closer to the relegation zone than they are the top six. Now I have to admit, despite the slow start that Coventry had made to this season, I thought there'd be so much more patience with Robins, primarily because this has been a bit of a formula to Coventry in previous seasons gone by. For example, if we take last season as a case study, Coventry actually had one fewer point at this exact same point of the season than they do right now. After 15 matches of last season, they only had 15 points on the board. It was a very erratic and quite draw-heavy start to the season that Coventry had in these opening blocks of games, but then coming out of this November international break here, they just went absolutely on an amazing run from that point onwards and got themselves into playoff contention. Even then, if we go back to the 2022/23 season where Coventry actually made the top six in the end, after 15 matches of this season, they'd only picked up 17 points, so they'd only had one more point on the board than they do right now, and Mark Robins still managed to deliver a playoff finish for them. Despite such an inconsistent start, not winning any of their first 7 matches of that season, it had become a little bit formulaic, and I think that's why a lot of people from the outside looking in, when they saw Coventry starting this season quite slowly, there wasn't necessarily much of a panic there, because we've all thought we've seen this before with Coventry. Now there's no doubt for the Sky Blues so far this season, they've just been so erratic in performances and results especially. They'd only strung together back-to-back wins on one occasion so far. That was this little block of games here where they beat Luton 3-2. Really good comeback in that game. I thought that might have been the start of something for Robins to rediscover a bit of momentum. Brilliant showing away at the Riverside, beating them 3-0. I know they were helped out by the red card in that game, but not many teams will go to the Riverside this season, put 3 goals past them and win in that sort of fashion, but Coventry were able to do so. But they then couldn't follow that up with a performance a few days later and lost this game to Derby. But with these 2 games recently in the back of my mind, I just find it mental that the board have decided that this is the moment to pull the trigger on Robins. As you know, on this channel we like to dive into some of the underlying numbers and things like that as well, and when looking into the underlying numbers for Coventry so far this season, it just reinforces my sort of point of view with them so far this season, that I actually think they've been quite unlucky in a number of matches. If we look at their chance creation numbers so far this season, they've been among the best teams in the Championship. Only Watford, Leeds and Middlesbrough have accumulated a higher XG up until this point of the season than Coventry have. Now, they've not always got their rewards for getting into a lot of good areas. I wouldn't necessarily put that down to Robins. I just think their forwards for a lot of the campaign have been misfiring so far. As we can see here, they've underperformed their XG by 1.9 goals. The way I view a lot of things though is, I think it's the manager's job to get these players into that sort of system where they are creating good chances, getting into those areas, and then it's on the players to actually go out and execute that sort of game plan. Even then, and looking at the opposite end of the pitch, Coventry have been a pretty solid side in terms of not actually giving away that many chances to the opposition. Up until this point in the campaign, only Millwall, Middlesbrough, West Brom, Sheffield United, Burnley and Leeds have conceded a lower XG than Coventry have. So even while they have conceded quite a few goals so far this season, the underlying numbers have been decent once again. The reason I stress this is quite an important aspect with Coventry as well, is because when they've started previous seasons quite slowly, a lot of the underlying data and metrics have always proven that eventually that will balance out. They'll start to move up the table a little bit. I think there was evidence of that it could have happened again this season. For whatever reason, they've just always been slow starters to the season. Ultimately, it was these sort of tight affairs that ended up costing Robins his job. So the final straw was losing that home game against Derby 2-1. And I mean, there have been countless examples this season where Coventry have had more territory in the match. They've had the better chances in a lot of games. They've just not been able to kill teams off. The Preston game obviously was a decent example of that. Obviously, I got to see them up close and personal in this one. They started out this one really slowly against us, but second half was a fairly even game of football. Coventry had a goal ruled out in the second half of that one and had some really good chances as well. Ultimately, it was Emile Rees who made the difference in the end, though. This game against Sheffield Wednesday, once again, it was Coventry who had more of the territory, especially in the second half, but they pop up with a 93rd minute winner, which just sinks them. Now, based on the expectations at Coventry at the start of the season, they're nowhere near where they need to be right now, but I just think with the amount of credit that he's got in the bank at that football club and with that fan base, and justifiably so, he took on that job in 2017, I think it was, where the club was heading absolutely nowhere. They were dwindling down the leagues. He got them promoted from League 2, promoted from League 1, had them a penalty shootout away from playing in the Premier League, and last season had them this close to an FA Cup final. He's reinvented them time and time again with different groups of players and at times playing different sorts of football as well. The Championship League table is so congested right now, whereby if you win a couple games back to back, you'll absolutely fly up the table, and I'm just really gutted for Coventry in general, really. I really like Mark Robins, and I always sort of looked at Coventry as a bit of a break to the regular mould of what most Championship football clubs have become these days, which is whereby most Championship managers will probably last anywhere from 8 to 18 months in the job, and I fear that that's the sort of club that Coventry are now going to turn into. Going off the latest bookies odds for who will become the next Coventry manager, as of recording, it is Frank Lampard, who is the overwhelming favourite. You've also got a few other names in here. Robbie Keane, Matt Bloomfield, John Eustace, Lee Carsley, Stephen Schumacher, Nicky Butt, Rob Edwards. The problem I have with the vast majority of this list is, I mean, I'm thinking with my Preston North End hat on, if we were in the market for a manager right now, who would I rather take? Any of these names or Mark Robins? My answer would absolutely be I'd way prefer Mark Robins over any of these managers. But it does look to be the case that it is more than likely that Frank Lampard will be the next boss in at Coventry. If recent reports are to be believed, he is by far and away the front runner for this job. And Coventry fans, I mean, I'd love to get your perspective on this one in the comments down below. Lampard's an interesting one. We do have a bit of a case study of what he's about because he has been managing at Championship level previously. He had that 1 year with Derby County where he did make it to the Championship playoff final. Generally speaking, I did think that Derby were a decent watch that season, and it was a really competitive season in terms of the number of big clubs and big sides that were in the Championship. But I think it would probably be fair to say that with the team he had at Derby, how much money was invested into that squad, Lampard probably met expectations by getting them to the playoffs, and even in some fans' eyes, they thought it was an underperformance only to finish sixth with that Derby squad that had the likes of Mason Mount, Tamori, Harry Wilson, and all of those stars sort of sprinkled in there, but they were all still quite raw at the time. I think Lampard did bring the best out of a lot of those young players. His first season at Chelsea, also fairly underrated considering he was working with a transfer embargo, but still managed to deliver a top 4 finish for them. But since that point, his managerial reputation has taken a little bit of a hit. His second year at Chelsea really wasn't great. Everton, I think you can look at it from a couple of different perspectives. It was a tough environment to go into because of all the issues that they've had behind the scenes, but I mean, speak to any Everton fan, they'll probably have conflicting views of Frank Lampard. And then his second stint at Chelsea was just an absolute disaster, but Chelsea were a basket case of a club at that point. Going into a club like Coventry now, there is a whole lot of potential because I still think it's a really good squad that absolutely has the potential to make the top 6 this season. But like I was saying at the start of the video, I truly think that Coventry have lost something special with this decision to get rid of Mark Robins, and I do fear they'll just become a bit of a stereotypical Championship club now, where they turn into a bit of a hire and fire machine every 18 or so months, whatever it might be. Do let me know in the comments down below though, what are your thoughts on this whole situation? Would Frank Lampard be a good appointment for Coventry? I'd love to know. Get your thoughts in the comments, and I'll see you all in the next one.